there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to, oops, wrong, no. Welcome to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're moving from book two to book three, starting book three of the Politics, which is the focus, which it is in book three of the Politics that Aristotle presents really what he kind of finally reveals the main point of the study of politics. That is the regime and the centrality of the regime. Now, that's the name of my book I published 2016, the centrality and several articles you can find on the web. It's that, and it's also the point of the fact that the regime is so central. This is why my first book, is all about book three. So therefore, this is the book. This is the chapter book, the book of the politics that grabbed my attention because it was such a hub. Book three, whereas in many ways, I would argue, and I have argued in the book, my first book, Aristotle's Best Regime, which is basically a commentary on book three, that book one and book two are kind of false starts. And even book three kind of starts a little bit of the false start, but it hints at what's going to be the real discussion. That is, we get to the regime or the politeia. The theme of book three is the politeia, what as I translate it is the regime. Now you can translate politeia as history has translated it as constitution, but that's kind of problematic because we hear constitution, we think of text, a written law, and a regime is more than merely the law of the thing. It's the law, it's the way of life, it's the culture, it's all these things combined, as well as the institutions and the structures and the habits and the social mores. Okay, so the politeia is a much more complex construction than mere just the written rules. Some people have translated as government. The traditional word is constitution. This is commonly done, but I think this is why that's problematic because it leads to kind of a narrow understanding what politeia means. Another traditional thing was government, but that's better. But it's more than mere government. It's again the government. We think of the institutions only. But the politeia is not only the institutions, but it's also the the culture, the values, the habits, the social mores, the way of life, or the preferred way of life the community wants. Um, More kind of it started with David Easton, and people call it the political system, and that works to some degree, but it's so innocuous. A regime but the problem with regime, I understand there's a problem with regime. This has a connotation of something autocratic and pejorative. Sometimes people call it pejorative. The regime, it's kind of pejorative. It's also kind of presumes a autocratic or non-democratic or problematic thing. But in French, it's less so in the French. It just means, and also sometimes in certain words, regimes mean system, structure. Uh, 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 um, so I can understand why some people don't like it. Now, let's go look at book three and start out chapter one today. Um, for one investigating the politeia, the regime, what each sort is and what its quality, virtually the first investigation concerns the city, the polis, to see what the city is. Now, he starts out the idea that we talk about the regime, and then he says, "Well, We need to talk about what the city is first." Again, this is, and I'm going to argue this is the false start. This is a fault. This is kind of another false start within the. Actually, if book one started out with we'll understand the city. We understand politics in terms of its parts, and we started with the household. Um, well, even through that, it was always shown that all these relationships of family, household, economy, all those things, and including even slaves, um, often relied on dealing with the politeia, the regime. Okay, and book two we took that the best regime or the best city. I think that some of the best cities and the best ruled cities and the best regime, right? But then again, that's problematic because he gives us an account of opinions, and then lastly, he starts out give us examples of the things, but the examples tend to be more critical than positive, right? Even the theoretical ones are problematic. Only at the very end does he kind of give a general overview of more favorable a kind of history of legislation and both legislation of regimes and legislation of law. But again, it's not. He mentions the regime, but he doesn't explain it. It is here he says, "Well, we're going to explain, we're going to investigate the regime, but we're going to start with the city." Okay, so let's we continue. For as it is, there are disputes. Some are arguing that the city performed an action, others that it was not the city, but the oligarchy or the tyrant. In other words, the investigation of the regime and the origins in the city tied to a dispute, he says. Who performed the actions? Some people say it's not that the city performed the action, rather, it was the tyrant or the oligarch. Okay, we see this in about this thing. We see this. Who's responsible? The nation responsible, or the rulers? That those elites who are ruling. Right. We see this argument today um, in politics, particularly in light of the challenges of populism, right, and the challenges of or the apparent threat of populism by some elites looking at this and see this as a threat, or some intellectuals who look at this populism as a kind of a threat, right? We have this big debate today about this. So Aristotle says that there's a kind of a debate. He opens it, there's a question of who really commits the action. It's an argument. Some people say it's not the city. It's really the oligarchs or tyrant. We see that the entire activity of the political ruler, the politicon, okay, the political statesman, the politicos politician, the political man, this is the politeos, politicos, okay, a certain activity of politicos, okay, political ruler, the one who rules political, or and the legislator. So the politicos and the legislature, um, the politic. Yeah, I'm right. It's in the Greek. It's the politicos and the lawmaker, right? These two things, right? Um, uh, 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 is concerned with the city, right? And the regime is a certain arrangement of those inhabit the city. So therefore, both the statesman, or the political, the politician, the politicos, and the nomothete, the one who creates the laws, the lawmaker, the legislator, they are concerned with the city, but then, and the regime is a certain arrangement of the city, right? How the city is arranged. But since the city belongs among composite things, and like other composite wholes, it is made of any parts, it is clear that the first thing must be sought is the citizen. Okay. So therefore he says, now book one said the part was the organic whole was the of the city. What, in other words, was book one and book three kind of interconnect with each other in this sense. That book one, the city was also a composite whole, but the composite wholes of households, oikos, right? Now it's a composite whole, but what is being it's a composite of it is citizens, he says, right? And his citizens must be sought as the citizen. The and the citizen is it's a derivative of polis. It's the one who inhabits the polis, in that sense, right? Um, for for the city is a certain multitude of citizens. So therefore, it is a certain the city. The polis is a multitude of citizens. Now, the citizen in the polis is this. Now, two kind of ignore. book three, in this point right here, kind of ignores the household to a degree. So that we get the account of book three almost, in some sense, ignores the household in that weird sense. This is why, and in fact, book four, we return when we go again to the thing. He kind of returns to the household. He returns. He needs to address the household again in ways that he doesn't necessarily do that here. He looks at the individual. He seems to reduce it to the individual in the sense. That's interesting in that sense. He reduces the aggregation to these things called citizens. Now, citizens, that's a very important concept. A citizen is not a subject. A citizen is someone who shares in rule. A citizen is someone who is a ruler. He is one who rules. He is one who has the potential. He is ruled and ruled in turn. A mere, in other words, a king or an absolute ruler or a simple ruler that only rules and without being ruled. That's one thing. And a subject is someone who is ruled but does not participate in rule. Okay, subjects are not citizens in this sense. This is something that even Rousseau will make fun of, which is, Rousseau will go on his contract a little line like everyone in France at the time of the monarchy speaks of his fellow citizens, but don't they know they're committing treason by saying that? Because in France there's only one citizen, and that is the king, right? The reality is that they are not citizens; they're subjects. So therefore, we have to look at this. This is interesting that the theme switches now to it's an aggregation, opposed to an aggregation, but an aggregation of citizens. It ignores the citizen is one who shares in rule. It does not mean that all populations. It means the citizens, those who are the ones who holds the right to exercise rule, archon. Okay, may not be the ruling one. It may not be those actually ones who have the power and dominate and control the city, but they have a voice and a formal right or exercising of right in that sense. Thus, who ought to be called a citizen and what the citizen is must be investigated. So the discussion first brings in. We're going to talk about regime, but and then he says, well, the city's aggregation. But now we're going to talk about citizen. We have to discuss who's going to be the citizen. So the city. We talk first about the city. The city. This is why book three begins with a first. We're going to talk about the regime, but first we're going to talk about the regime. We're going to talk about the city. But the city's a composite whole, and therefore we have to talk about its composite whole of it says what is it? It's a aggregation of citizens. So therefore we have to talk about what the citizen is, right? So we have we get into the city. It's a very abrupt discussion of city that immediately leads us to the discussion of this flash of police outside or ambulance outside. The discussion of the citizen now, right? There's often much dispute about the citizen, for not everyone agrees that the same person is a citizen. Someone who is a citizen in a democracy is not one in an oligarchy. Those who happen to be so designated, but in some other sense, for example, honorary citizens, must be disregarded. Nor is the citizen a citizen by inhabiting the place. For aliens and slaves share in habitation. So it's, in other words, it's not something, it's, in other words, who's a citizen and not a citizen is much more dubious. Oligarchy, that's the one condition, right? Citizen, it's variable, one, meaning of citizen. Two, it's not merely about It's not a status, a mere status that says honorary. It has to have actuality towards it. It has to have something about ruling or exercise. And the third is it's not merely inhabiting, right? Because even aliens and slaves inhabit the same habitation. Nor those partaking in matters of justice to the extent of being subject to lawsuits and adjudication. For this even exist those who share as a result of contractual agreements, since these things exist for them as well. So it's not also about legal rights. In other words, citizenship is not about legal rights, merely about legal rights or really fundamentally tied to legal rights. Because even non-citizens and strangers, people in contractual relations, have legal rights. Others have legal rights, have rights to be justice and the rights to adjudication under the law. For that matter, in many places, not even aliens partake completely in these things, but they must necessarily find a patron so that they can take part in this community in a incomplete sense. So therefore, he says aliens need a patron, someone to let. So some places that they don't even let those people like exercise some aspects of this aliens of, let's say, protecting injustice or you know they can. This means that they're not really fully a member of a community, and they need a patron so that they can participate. Okay, right, and represent them and advocate for their interests. Okay, right, the patron. It's not even aliens. For many places, not even aliens partake completely in these things that I mentioned up here. But rather they must find a patron so that they can take part in this sort of community in an incomplete sense. Like children who are not yet enrolled because of age and elderly persons who have been relieved, they must be admitted to be citizens in a sense, but not unqualifiedly, because rather with the addition of incomplete or superannuated or something else of the sort, it makes no difference. What had been said is as what has been said is clear. In other words, let's look at this one for a second. Yeah, in other words, those beyond a certain age were relieved politically from their military duties, and this is simply annually means retired. In other words, they're retired in that sense, relieved, they're retired. Now he's saying that therefore the people who are young, there's the children and the young, not of age, and those who have been retired or kind of made not longer able to participate. These are still citizens, but they're not actively. They're not fully. Either they're not fully. They're not. They're not. He says that they're kind of. That's why he said they're incomplete or superannuated or something like this sort. Because what is citizenship? Citizenship is exercising in political life. It is sharing in the rule. It is having a say in the rule. Okay? It is is participating and having an active say in making the decisions for the political community. We are seeking the citizen in the unqualified sense, the one who has no defect of this sort requiring correction, since questions may be raised and resolved concerning such things in the cases of those who have been deprived of their prerogatives or excised as well. In other words, we're not looking at deprived of prerogative animals, technical term of people who are stripped of their citizenship, okay, or exiled, right? The exiled. We're not. We're going to look at the citizen in its pure sense, in its unqualified sense. What does it mean? Okay, and the citizen in the unqualified sense is defined by no other thing so much as partaking in the decisions and office, or being able to hold office. Being able to partake in decisions, to deliberate actively, to be able and make deciding what decision should be done, and being able to hold office. Right now, some offices are differentiated by time, so that in some cases the same person is not permitted to hold them twice, or others after some definite period of time has passed. But others are indefinite, such as that of jurors or assemblymen. So some have a time period, and that there's rules that you can't continually hold them, or only after a certain period of times have passed. Okay, that some period of time has passed, but you can hold it again. Or then there's some things that are just indefinite that you just have it. There's no definite time; they just come for the purpose. They're either always active in that sense, or they come to a moment, like a juror, someone who comes, or judge. In other words, judge, the judge or juror, or an assemblyman who comes in, people who are there that day to vote on the assembly. Okay. Perhaps someone might say that the latter are not rulers and do not partake in the office on account of these things. In other words, the latter, perhaps, yet it would be ridiculous to deprive those with the greatest authority of the title of office. In other words, those who decide don't necessarily have the office holders, and therefore, in other words, it says it should. Let's think of this title again. Perhaps someone might say that the latter are not ruler, the jurors, or something like that. Um, uh, yeah. um, and perhaps someone said that and do not partake in the office and account of these things. Yet it would be ridiculous to deprive those with the greatest authority of the title of office. In other words, those who have whoever these people, the citizens are the ones with the greatest authority, right? But since it should make no difference, the argument is over a term. For what is common to a juror and assemblyman lacks a name that could apply to both. In other words, he's saying that what distinguishes, in other words, what is common to these teams lack a different name that is common to both. For the sake of definition, then let it be an indefinite office, right? What is common to this definite office? There's a kind of indefinite office here, right? There's no defined office, whereas most offices have a defined office, right? We we set it down then that citizens are those who take part in this way. So therefore, these are the things they do. They exercise decision, they deliberate, they engage in making decisions, they engage in the process of how the city decides, and they hold office either through an indefinite office or a defined office, a definite office holder. That he mentions, right? There's two criteria. The definition of citizen that fits best with all of those who are called citizen is therefore something of this sort. But it should not be overlooked that of things where the constituent element differs in kind, one of them being primary, the other secondary, the other derivative. A common element either is not present at all in so much as they are such, only slightly. So therefore, he's saying that, in other words, okay, even that we say we have this defined this as those who exercise power, those are like this, we find it like this a little bit this way. But we have to realize that, okay, the constituent elements. It's in other words, the elements that define what the thing is. Now one of them is going to be primary, one is going to be secondary, and another aspect of it will be derivative. Not, in other words, it's not necessarily. It comes from the other part. It derives from the other part, and not a category an equal category to that, right? And and we were about to be interrupted. I had to take a second off. So we have this kind of he has this idea about about he's getting technical in terms of the nature of a thing, right? Like I said, it was either going to be something primary, secondary, derivative, something like this, and it's not present. And the and common element easy that can be there is either not present at all, insofar as they, or maybe only slightly, the common element. Okay, right? He continues. We see that regimes differ from one another in kind. Now, this is a stop. He says this common element is talked about here, right? About what is a citizen, how it defines a citizen. Um, it hints at something that's maybe it's present, it's primary, secondary, or derivative, and that therefore these other things work in that sense, and that the and that and it may not be present at all in so much as 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 they are such, but only slightly. So it's maybe not. Maybe it's a something is not. Maybe the real thing that defines the common element is. So what's the common element of all citizens? He's saying. What is the common element of citizens per se? And this is now he leads to this. We see all regimes differ from one another in kind, and that some are prior and some are posterior. For those that are errant and deviant, some must necessarily be posterior to those that are without error. So therefore, he argues, okay, there's going to be different kinds, different types. There's going to be different types. Regimes going to be different kind. They're going to be different in kind. Different type of regimes will vary by kind. And then there's going to be a difference between those regimes that are proper and then those deviate. And the deviant ones must come after, posterior to the correct ones. Because the error, in other words, errors emerge from deviation from the correct. So errors, the correct comes first, and the errors emerge out of it or deviate from it. The argument goes, the logic of the position he means to be saying. In other words, the deviant doesn't start first. The deviated doesn't start first. We don't get to a deviated thing and then achieve the correct thing. It starts with the correct, and then the defects emerge, and the deviations and defects emerge that deviate from the correct. That's how it's posterior. Some are prior and some are posterior. And those that are errant and deviant must be posterior to those who are there. In what sense are we speaking of deviant regimes? It will be evident later. In other words, he says, when we talk about the politeia, about deviance, we'll talk about this later. I'm not going to do it right now. I just wanted to raise this point here, he says. Hence, the citizen must necessarily differ in the case of each sort of regime. Whoa. So the citizen, who's the citizen and what the citizen is not something that's universally understood. It's going to deviate because of what's under the regime. So maybe the citizen is not a primary concept, but a derivative one. Not even primary, secondary, but a derivative one. Okay. Accordingly, the citizen that was spoken of as a citizen above all in a democracy, above all in a democracy, he may but will not necessarily be a citizen in the other things. So whoever the citizen that he says, this is what is interesting. He says that's weird. And in the Greek, it is kind of a weird sentence too. He goes that accordingly, the citizen that was spoken, what that was spoken of as a citizen above all. And I think this is where Lord is kind of changing it. Is the missing is here in translation is the citizen in a democracy. In other words, the account of a citizen, those who share rules. At one level, this definition of one who shares rules and rule in return. Seems to fully define the citizen of a democracy. This is what the Greek, I would argue, this is what the Greek would say. Not Lord changes this and says, "Oh, the citizen that's being discussed there is the citizen of democracy." Okay, so the question is the account earlier of what a citizen is it one? And we have to look at this back here because remember how it begins the chapter, a dispute about the tyrant or the dispute begins whether the tyrant or the oligarch. So who's speaking there? The speaker is saying that it's not the city didn't do it. The city was not responsible. Rather, it was the oligarch at the time. That's a Democrat speaking. So the voice that's introducing the question is from a democratic point of view. So that therefore maybe the definition of what has been given here is a democratic one, not a general one, right? So that's what he says. This is why he says, accordingly, the citizen now spoken of as a citizen above all In a was one, I would say, was one in a democracy would be, or it was in a democracy. He may, but will not necessarily be a citizen in the other. So therefore, who's a citizen? In other words, a citizen in democracy will not be a citizen in per se the oligarchy or other regimes, the ones in kind. Okay? In some regimes, there are no people. Whoa, there's no people. What I mean by this is there's no multitude. There's no multitude. There's no many. In other words, the regimes are no multitude. Nor is an assembly recognized in law, but only a consulting meeting of summoned persons. And cases are adjudicated by a group of officials. So now in 4, this is Aristotle appears to be thinking of the consulting bodies such as the Council of the 5,000, which formed part of the modern oligarchic regime in Athens in 411 BC. Again, this is given example of in Book 8 of the Thucydides. In Sparta, for example, different overseers try differing cases involving agreements. The senators, those involving murders, and other offices, perhaps others. So the Spartans example of this. And it is the same in the case of Carthage, where certain offices try all of the cases. So again, Aristotle's argument here is that the regimes like that of Sparta and Carthage handle judicial business primarily through tribunals or office rather than the large popular juries, as is the case in democracies like Athens. He had previously indicated that Carthage is even more restrictive in this respect than Sparta, too, right? So, but in our definition of citizen, can it admit? So this is not in the text in the Greek. This is his kind of like adding on that maybe it makes sense, right? But in our definition of citizen, admits of correction. Can stand it as it is. In other words, our definition of citizen can stand as it is, admits of correction. So our definition of citizen admits of correction. In others, in the other regimes, so therefore, who does ours? In other regimes, it is not the indefinite rulers who is the assemblyman or juror, but one whose office is definite. So therefore, in other words, in other regimes, it's not the indefinite rulers, the ones who are indefinite, those who have no defined moment, who is the assemblyman juror, but rather it's a defined, definite office holder, right? For of these, either all or some are assigned to deliberate and adjudicate. Others concerning all matters, or this, or concerning some. So therefore, the question is, the different type of regimes will define who. In other words, every regime deals with these two questions. One is, uh, uh, what is it? Who deliberates, and who adjudicates, and who exercise the offices, right? And is it all, or in other words, either all, and is this, do either all do it, or some, or one particular person do it, right? So it's double question: who does what, or what is done, who does it, and is it one, few, or many, right? Um, or all. Okay, that's even more interesting, right? Um, in other words, for of these, either all or some are assigned to deliberate and adjudicate, either concerning all matters or some. So therefore, what matters they deal with. There's two things: either all or some are to deliberate and adjudicate. These examples here, or regarding what matters, it's either all matters or some matters. So an office, in other words, the assemblyman either is a wall or an appointed person. A juror is either all or an appointed person, and whether these people address everything or only some issues. Okay, this is what he's saying there. Now he ends chapter 1 with this last section. Who is a citizen then is evident from these things. The answer is whoever is entitled to share in the offices involving deliberation or decision is, we can now say, a citizen in this city. And the city is the multitude of such persons that is adequate with a view to a self-sufficient life. The city is the what those people that share an adequate view that is adequate. In other words, they're able to with a view towards a self-sufficient. Now, self-sufficient here, autarkus. I'm going to go look at here. I think it is autarkus, because autarkus is not meant in this sense of self-sufficient, as Emerson, self-sufficient, to be totally free of everything else and alone and autonomous. Um, um, Looking at the Greek for a second. I hate this. I wish they make the chapters a little clearer. Yeeks. I apologize. Okay, that's 4. I should see the number here. There it is. Yeah, autarkus. Yeah, self-sufficient in that sense. That they are self-sufficient. They are able to What is meant by this is able to um, satisfy their needs, being able to live and also live well. Okay, it's not self-sufficient. It's just being free of everything else. It's no having enough resources. Self-sufficient is enough resources and stuff that they're able to not only live, not only survive, but also prosper and we live beautifully, live well. So therefore, it's a city who is, in other words, composed of citizens in the sense. And a citizen is one what? It is a city is composed of persons who are living to a self-sufficient life, adequate to a self-sufficient life. That is to speak simply. Right? Speaking simply here, the city is a multitude of people who are living together to a sake to achieve to an adequate view to the self-sufficient living life. Okay, that's how he defines the city in that sense. And therefore, a citizen is one who what is who shares in the offices deliberation or decision right? Deliberation, decision. Which decision not only about what is to be done, but also judicial, adjudicate. So, and that's how he ends chapter 1. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, please put them below. If you want, um, if you've liked it, like it, and share with a friend. Encourage them to subscribe. If you didn't like it, you can say what your criticisms are, and I respond to them. Please put your comments down. If I see them, I'll get to them. If you please subscribe, get others, your friends, share the video, please. Like I said earlier. If you want to follow me on social media, my information is below. If you wish to contribute, you can help to grow this thing more, grow this more. In fact, I'm discovering that YouTube is making me pay now. Google is making me pay because my source my number of videos are now over that I has. And I don't want to pay the big fee. I paid a minor fee, but it's even the minor fee I'm getting now 50%. So if I keep on this production level, I will have to I will have to kill videos, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to kill videos. So please, so I can continue this, I might have to have some people helping me because otherwise I have to pay myself. And it's getting life. And I can't buy my books. Oh no! Well, whatever. And this is what YouTube used to be more free. Now it's like let's make money from you. So So therefore, Patreon, Subscribe Star. You can do so by buying my. Another way you can help me is buy my. Okay, you can buy my other two books I mentioned earlier today. Um, I don't get the money immediately for that. And what money I'll get is very small. If you really want to help me, you don't want to be a Patreon or a Subscribe Star contributor, you can buy my book. And buy it for a friend and give it to a friend, or buy a Christmas present to give it to a friend. Right? Christmas coming up soon. Or not, okay, many people see this years later. So it's not Christmas now. Okay, all right, okay. But when I make doing this, it's through Yulu, and it's a comment. It's basically Cliff's notes on politics. It's a notebook for ourselves politics, a workbook. It's basically it's not merely it's kind of a study guide and workbook to help you go through the politics. It has sections for notes that you can put in there for yourself. It's after every major book, after every book of the politics I give source. It gives outlines, charts, and activities. It's it also has a extended bibliography at the end of the secondary literature on different parts of the politics, um, um, that I used from a friend of mine who does couple of years he does a new edition, and I asked him could I use it for this because I designed it for students. And I went to Lulu because the publishers who were going to do this originally wanted us to sell it for $120 or $100, and I said nah. Even Lulu myself was costing it's like under 30, but that I wanted it under 20, but I couldn't get it under 20 because of the size, and I didn't want to make the font so small. You have to look like blind to see it. So now the cost of publishing, inflation, right? Okay, that's it. Have a good day. I stop now. Take care, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.